People think betrayal arrives like broken glass. It doesn't. The expensive kind arrives polished, symmetrical, calendar approved. It arrives in a confirmation email with the restaurant logo embossed at the top and a cheerful line beneath it that would have looked harmless to anyone who didn't share a life with the man who booked it. Anniversary dinner for four. For four. I stood barefoot in the kitchen of our Tribeca penthouse at 6:17 p.m., holding my phone over the marble island while the espresso machine hissed softly behind me. On the counter sat white peonies in a crystal vase, a leather folder Ethan had left near the fruit bowl, and the Cartier bracelet he'd given me on our 10th anniversary, for 11 years. Ethan Bennett had built our life around the illusion of precision. His suits were Brioni. His apologies were tailored. His lies, I would soon learn, were the most expensive thing he owned. I read the confirmation again. Le Bernardin. Sedum. 3:00 p.m. Table confirmed. Anniversary dinner. For four. At first I thought it had to be corporate. A donor meeting. Maybe. Some overproduced performance of intimacy for money. Ethan worked in a world where everything was framed, lit, and tax deductible. But that explanation died the second I checked the calendar. There was no donor dinner, no foundation event, no board obligation, and our anniversary had been 3 weeks earlier. I called him. Straight to voicemail. I texted, "What is this reservation?" No reply. I waited exactly 90 seconds before opening Find My iPhone. He was already downtown. Already there. That was when the shape of the truth changed. Not because I knew what it was, because I knew he had no intention of letting me discover it in the correct order. And Ethan cared deeply about order. Order was how men like him survived ugly things. Not by avoiding them. By sequencing them. By deciding when each person was allowed to know which version. I changed out of the cream cashmere set I'd been wearing and put on black. Not for drama. For clarity. A black kite coat. Black heels. No jewelry except my wedding ring, which suddenly felt less like a symbol than evidence. On my way out, I caught my reflection in the mirror by the elevator. Composed? Controlled? Familiar. That would matter later. Le Bernardin glowed the way certain lies do softly. Beautifully. With complete confidence they won't be interrupted. Wet pavement reflected the lights outside. Inside, everything was white tablecloths, lowered voices, and the kind of luxury that makes people whisper even when they have nothing to hide. I gave the hostess Ethan's name. She smiled instantly. Of course. They've already been seated. Already. That word moved through me like a blade. She walked me past the dining room with the serene speed of someone escorting a wife toward a life she didn't know had been divided. And then I saw him. Ethan. Navy Brioni suit. White shirt open at the collar. Patek Philippe catching candlelight with the obscene confidence of old money. Across from him sat a woman in a cream sweater. Beautiful in the careful way women become when they've spent too long being told subtlety is safety. Beside her sat a little girl in a pale blue dress, coloring on the paper menu with 2 crayons and swinging one shiny patent shoe under the chair. The girl had Ethan's eyes. Shock isn't loud. Real shock is silent. It is your body understanding a thing your mind has not yet agreed to name. I stopped at the edge of the table. The child looked up first, then at Ethan. The way children do when they need the most important adult in the room to tell them what danger looks like. That small movement hurt more than anything, because it meant he had been important to her long enough to become instinct. Ethan looked up. Everything in his face changed. Not guilt first. Calculation. "Claire," he said. The woman turned so quickly she knocked her water glass. Ethan stood halfway. "Claire, this is not what I think?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "Please don't do this here. Do this here." As if I had brought the humiliation. As if I had arrived carrying chaos, instead of discovering it plated in front of me beside butter-poached lobster. The woman found her voice first. "I didn't know you were coming." I looked at her. "You knew he was married." Her silence answered better than words could. Then the little girl looked at Ethan and asked, quietly and clearly, "Daddy?" No one in the room moved. No one needed to. That one word did the work of a confession. A deposition. And a funeral. I looked back at him. He still had one hand on the chair, as if some part of him believed the evening might still be saved by tone. "Sit down," he said softly. "We can explain?" "We..." That almost impressed me. A man with a second family still believed he could moderate the room. I stepped closer. The woman looked terrified now. The child looked confused. Ethan looked irritated by collapse, more than ashamed of it. That was when I understood something important. The child was not the ugliest secret on the table. The ugliest secret was how prepared he had been for me not to exist inside this life. I looked at the child, then at the woman, then back at my husband, and I said the only sentence that mattered. "My husband has terrible timing." The woman shut her eyes. Ethan lowered his voice. "Claire." I slipped my wedding ring off my finger and set it beside his wine glass. Not thrown, placed. Precision for precision. Then I leaned in just enough for only him to hear. "You didn't hide a woman," I said. "You hid a structure." For the first time that night, real fear moved through his face. Not because I'd caught him cheating, because he realized I had understood there was more. I straightened. Then I looked at the woman and gave her the only mercy I had left. "Take your daughter home." Ethan stepped forward. "Claire." "Wait." I turned toward him one last time. "No," I said. "You wait." And I walked out while half the room pretended not to watch and the other half memorized my coat. By the time I reached the sidewalk, my phone was already vibrating. Ethan. Then Ethan again. Then Ethan a third time. I let it ring. Because men like Ethan always think the first crisis is discovery. It isn't. The first crisis is losing control of the sequence. And before midnight, he was going to learn what happened when I started arranging the order instead. Ethan came home at 6:12 the next morning. Not drunk. Not disheveled. Not shattered. That would have at least been honest. He came home looking curated. His coat folded over one arm. His expression composed. His voice already chosen before he crossed the threshold. I was in the kitchen when he entered, still wearing black. The reservation printout beside me. My phone charger plugged in next to a legal pad that now held 3 columns. Timeline. Institutions. Designatures. The bare place on my finger where the ring had been felt cooler than the rest of my hand. Ethan looked at the printout first, then at the notepad, and I watched him understand the danger. Not that I was angry, that I was documenting. "Claire," he said quietly, as if the right softness could undo the previous night. "We need to speak privately." I almost smiled. Private. Private was where language became anesthesia. Private was where women became emotional and men became complicated. "You mean before anyone else hears your version?" I asked. His jaw tightened by half a degree. "This is a marriage." "No," I said. "What I saw was logistics." That landed. He stepped closer, lowering his voice into the intimate register he used in donor rooms and funerals. "What happened last night was not simple." I looked at him. "A child called you daddy in a Michelin star restaurant. Which part needs simplification?" He exhaled slowly. "Her name is Lily." I said nothing. "She's 6. Still nothing. "That woman's name is Sophia." "Interesting." "Not sorry. Not ashamed. Names first." As if identifying the pieces made the betrayal feel mature. He mistook my silence for an opening and moved too quickly. "It started years ago during a period when you and I were..." "Careful," I said. He stopped. Not because I was loud. Because he heard the warning. I folded the reservation paper once. "You do not get to build a second family and then invoice me for emotional distance." For the first time that morning, something in his polished face hardened. "Whatever anger you feel right now," he said, "you need to think very carefully about what happens next." Almost a threat. Not loud enough to quote. Clear enough to understand. I leaned against the island. "No. You need to think about what already happened." His eyes moved to the legal pad again. "What exactly are you doing?" Finding out whether adultery was the most expensive part. That hit. He recovered quickly. "You're spiraling." There it was. Not confession. Not repair. Diagnosis. He was trying to turn reaction into instability. I nodded once. "Good. Keep going." I'd like to know how early in the morning you become insulting. His face cooled. Do you have any idea what public fallout from this could do? He asked. To the foundation? To donors? To Lily? Interesting again. Not me. Not us. The foundation. Donors. Lily. He still believed the moral center of the room could be moved with optics. Then the intercom buzzed. Persisi. I walked to the wall panel and pressed answer. Yes. Margaret Ellis for Mrs. Bennett. Ethan went still. Everyone in certain circles knew Margaret Ellis. She had been co-trustee on my father's estate. She had the kind of reputation that made men stand up straighter and read more carefully. 3 minutes later, she stepped into the apartment in a charcoal coat and low heels that clicked like punctuation. Margaret, Ethan said. Mr. Velster. Bennett. She didn't offer him a smile. She didn't sit until I did. Then she placed a slim leather folder on the island. Turned to me. And asked one question. Do you want the emotional version or the useful version? The useful one. I said. Good. She opened the folder. I've already spoken to Daniel Foster. That changed Ethan's face more than the restaurant had. Daniel Foster was not just a banker. He was the kind of private financial gatekeeper whose loyalty was measured in procedure and whose favorite weapon was documentation. Margaret continued. No discretionary movement adjacent to your protected structures can occur without review. Ethan gave a short, disbelieving laugh. This is disproportionate. Margaret turned to him for the first time. What part? She asked. The hidden child. The undisclosed partner. Or the possibility that you believed trust architecture was decorative. He said nothing, and I watched the exact moment he realized he was no longer speaking to a wife. He was speaking to an archive. Margaret slid a pen toward me. Make a list of every institution where your signature matters. I took it. Ethan stared at the pen. Then at the folder. Then at me. It stages. Don't let outsiders build this into something bigger than it is. I looked at him. You already did. Margaret stood. Pack for 3 days. We're going to review access. Permissions S. Correspondence. Board exposure. And related entities. I went to the bedroom and filled one suitcase. Max Mara coat. 2 blouses. 1 pair of dark denim. Charger. Toiletries. The black dress I had worn to Le Bernardin. Not because I wanted it. Because evidence matters. When I came back out, Ethan was standing at the window with his back to us. Phone in hand, but not calling anyone. He had finally understood what frightened him most. Not my anger. Not even my departure. The possibility that his life was about to become paperwork. At the door. I stopped. He turned. I have his gaze. You didn't come home to tell the truth. I said. You came home to get ahead of the record. Then, Margaret and I left him standing in the apartment he had mistaken for a private stage. By noon, I was going to learn the child was not the worst secret. The money was. Sophia asked to meet at a cafe in Midtown where expensive people went when they wanted to look accidental. Muted walls. Tiny marble tables. Women in Saint Laurent sunglasses, pretending not to recognize one another. Men in Tom Ford overcoats reading emails they would later swear they never saw. She was already there when I arrived. No child. No cream sweater. No illusion left. Just a navy coat. Untouched coffee. And a folder held between both hands like truth had become physically dangerous. I didn't sit immediately. You have exactly 1 minute to explain why I shouldn't leave. I said. She swallowed. Because he's going to tell you this was just an affair. That got my attention. I sat. Her eyes were tired in the honest way fear makes them. She looked less like a rival now, and more like a woman who had recently realized she had not been loved. She had been managed. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. She said. Good. I said. That would save us both time. She nodded once and slid the folder across the table. He's been moving money. Through you? Through Lily. My hand stopped on the folder. She kept talking. Faster now. Like hesitation would kill her nerve. Education accounts. Expense vehicles. Household continuity planning. Some of it is normal. Some of it isn't. And some of it references your trust. That was the sentence that changed the temperature of the room. Not the child. Not the mistress. My trust. I opened the folder. The first page was clean. Too clean. That corporate luxury language wealthy men use when they want theft to look like concern. Projected educational allocations. Household stabilization. Transition optics. Continuity assumptions. I looked up. When did you copy these? Last week. Why? Her mouth trembled once. Then steadied. Because he started talking about you like you were already gone. That was a better wound than I had expected. I said nothing. She took a breath. He said once certain paperwork was in place, people would understand that the situation was delicate. That donors preferred stability. That your judgment had become unpredictable. I stared at her. My judgment. He said you were emotionally rigid. Difficult in private. Financially interpretive. I actually laughed. One short, cold sound. Financially interpretive. There it was. The beginning of the strategy. Not just to deceive me. To classify me. To turn wife into liability. Did he ever tell you he planned to leave me? I asked. No. Sophia said. That's the worst part. He wasn't planning to leave you quickly. He was planning to reduce you slowly. That line hit with surgical precision. Reduce me slowly. With language. With meetings. With concern. I turned another page. There were internal notes attached to account references. Not all complete, but enough to establish intention. One memo included a line that made me go still. Beneficiary adjacency. Manageable pending donor-facing continuity. Adjacency. That was how men like Ethan made theft feel civilized. By turning human beings into abstract risk, I looked at her again. Why now? For the first time since I sat down. Sophia looked ashamed. Because last night wasn't supposed to happen like that. She said. Lily wasn't supposed to say anything. He told me he was going to handle you soon. Such an ugly word when used by a man with 2 homes. And after the restaurant? He came to my apartment at midnight. Not to check on Lily. To ask what documents I had seen. That was all I needed. Fear always tells the truth faster than guilt. He thinks you copied more than this? I asked. Yes. Did you? Pause. Then she reached into her bag and produced a USB drive. Enough to make him panic. I took it. What else? Her voice dropped. There's a memo. Foundation related. Succession language. It talks about donor-facing leadership and emotionally affected parties. I held her gaze. And where is that? In an internal packet he printed at home 2 weeks ago. My heart did something strange then. Not broke. Sharpened. He had not simply hidden a second family. He had been designing the administrative version of my disappearance. I closed the folder. Sophia looked at me like she expected rage. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. Is Lily legally protected? She blinked. What? Does the child have anything in her name he can leverage against her later? Sophia stared at me for a second. Then shook her head. No. Not really. Then listen carefully. I said. You will send everything you have to Margaret Ellis. You will not warn him again. You will not let him in your apartment. And if he says the word protection one more time, remember this. Men like Ethan never mean protection. They mean control. Her eyes filled. But she nodded. I stood. Claire, she said. I paused. I know you hate me. I thought about that. Then I answered honestly. No, 5. I hate that he built a system and made us fight inside it. And I left with the folder under my arm and the first clean outline of the war finally visible. By late afternoon, Daniel Foster had agreed to meet. By evening, Ethan would learn that private betrayal becomes public risk the moment money touches documentation. And by morning, he was going to sit in a room with men who wore discretion like cologne and hear the worst word in his vocabulary. Logged. This story contains fictionalized elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Daniel Foster's office occupied the top floors of a midtown tower where privacy had been engineered into the carpet. The elevator required key access. The receptionist offered water in baccarat tumblers. The walls held abstract art so expensive, it had circled back into looking neutral. Daniel himself rose when Margaret and I entered. Tall, silver-haired, quiet in the way certain institutions are quiet, right before they close a gate. He shook my hand first, then Margaret's. Then he said, "Mr. Bennett is already here." Of course he was. Ethan was seated at the far end of the conference table when we entered. One hand on a leather folio, the other resting flat beside his phone as though posture could still influence outcome. He looked composed. That would not last. "Claire," he said, "before this gets carried away." Daniel lifted one hand. "We are already past that stage." Beautiful. We sat. Margaret slid Sophia's copies across the table. Daniel placed them beside a thicker folder already waiting near him. Ethan recognized it immediately. And something flickered in his expression. Not surprise. Recognition mixed with dread. Daniel opened the first set of documents. Household continuity notes. Education allocations. Routing references. Adjacent trust language. Ethan leaned back. Carefully casual. These are internal planning notes taken out of context. Margaret didn't even glance at him. Then provide the context. He didn't. Because context only works when someone has built a version of the truth that survives daylight. Daniel turned a page. "Did you or did you not test access assumptions against a protected structure for which you were not an authorized interpretive party?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "That framing is hostile." Daniel nodded slightly. "That is not an answer." I watched Ethan realize he had entered the wrong kind of room. At home, he manipulated emotion. At Le Bernardin, he manipulated sequence. Here, he would have to manipulate record-keeping. And men like Daniel did not flirt with ambiguity. Daniel opened the second folder and placed one document on the table. I recognized the header before I read the body. My trust. The full governing instrument my father had put in place after his death. The one Ethan had always treated as background architecture because it worked best when ignored. Daniel turned pages with deliberate calm until he reached the relevant clause. Then he read aloud. "Automatic review and temporary restriction shall be triggered upon evidence of material concealment. Beneficiary exposure through undisclosed dependency structures. Or attempted transfer. Recategorization. Or access adjacent to protected capital under compromised disclosure conditions." Silence. I looked at Ethan. He looked at the page like a man watching water rise beneath a locked door. Either he had never read it, or worse, he had skimmed it and mistaken confidence for literacy. "That clause doesn't apply here," he said. Daniel folded his hands. "It already has." For the first time that day, Ethan lost rhythm. "That's absurd." "No," Daniel said. "It's administrative." Administrative. A devastating word when spoken to men who think they are too important to be processed. Ethan turned to me, voice softening again. Reaching for intimacy like a weapon he still believed worked. "Whatever is happening between us does not justify detonating the entire financial structure around our lives." Our lives. A convenient phrase for men whose real concern is mobility. I met his gaze. "You built a second household and threaded my trust into paperwork I never approved." His face tightened. "That is not what happened." Daniel lifted one page. "Then perhaps you'd like to explain the phrase transition optics attached to household continuity assumptions." There it was. Ethan's silence lasted less than 2 seconds. Enough. He pivoted. "Those were planning notes." Margaret's tone sharpened by half a degree. "Planning for what?" No answer. Because there wasn't one he could say aloud without setting fire to the remaining architecture of his reputation. Daniel closed the trust document and pushed another paper forward. "Pending review. All discretionary authority adjacent to Claire Bennett's protected structures has been frozen. Any attempt to move, pressure, interpret, or privately renegotiate these terms will be logged." Logged. That word hit him almost as hard as frozen. He understood systems. He understood records. He understood that once a room like this began using words like logged, persuasion had already failed. "This is an overreaction," he said. Daniel finally looked directly at him. "No. It is a response." I had expected triumph to feel hot. It didn't. It felt clean. Not because he was suffering. Because for the first time since Le Bernardine, the truth had met a mechanism. Ethan stood too quickly. So that's it? 11 years of marriage and I'm treated like a threat? I stood too. No. I said. You're treated like a man who never thought paperwork applied to him. His eyes dropped briefly to the bare place on my hand where the ring had been. He noticed. Daniel rose. We're done here for today. As Margaret and I gathered the files, Daniel addressed me one last time. There will be follow-up requests. Chronology. Signatory review. Related entity mapping. We should also discuss whether the foundation board requires notice. Ethan's head snapped up. Absolutely not. And there it was. Not sorrow. Not guilt. Panic. The board mattered. The board was reputation translated into structure. When we stepped into the hallway, Ethan followed us. Claire's and Grace. I turned. He lowered his voice. If you take this to the board, you make everything public. I looked at him for a long second. Then I gave him the sentence he had earned. You already made it public. You just chose a better restaurant. That night, Margaret and I spread the documents across the dining table in her Upper East Side townhouse. Outside, the city moved in expensive indifference. Inside, I finally saw the full outline of the war. This was no longer about betrayal. It was about displacement. Replacement. A child used as emotional camouflage. A second household turned into a financial argument. And a man who had not simply lied to me. He had begun designing the version of my life that would continue after he removed me from its center. Just after midnight, another notification came in. Not from Ethan. From the board. Someone had seen the restaurant clip. The room was about to get much bigger. The succession memo was only 6 pages long. That was what made it obscene. Not dramatic enough to feel like a manifesto. Not crude enough to read as hatred. Just polished. To strategic. And written in the antiseptic language institutions use when they want cruelty to survive review. Margaret printed 2 copies. I read mine while the city brightened behind the windows of her townhouse. By page 2, I understood Ethan's actual plan. He had not intended to leave me suddenly. He had intended to reposition me. Slowly. With language. With optics. With concern. There were references to leadership continuity. Private family complexity. Donor-facing stability. And the need to reduce financially interpretive influence from personally affected parties during transition. Personally affected parties. That was me. Not wife. Not partner. Not the woman whose money, trust structures, and social labor had helped stabilize the exact circles he now wanted to keep me away from. Affected party. By page 4. I had to set it down. Not because I was shocked anymore. Because there is something uniquely humiliating about discovering a man has already translated your pain into management language before he has given you the decency of truth. Margaret watched me carefully. Do you want a minute? No, I said. I want chronology. She nodded once. Good answer. Not because it was brave. Because brave can be messy. Chronology leaves a trail. By mid-morning, the table held 4 stacks. Documents proving concealed structures. Emails suggesting reputational containment. The succession memo. And a growing record of Ethan's post-discovery conduct. At 1 o'clock, Ethan called. I answered because I wanted to hear what desperation sounded like when it still believed itself to be persuasive. Claire. His voice was softer now. Tired. Intimate. Rehearsed. They're overreacting. They're reading. You know how these rooms work. Yes, I said. That's why you wrote the memo. Pause. Then the pivot. That memo was never finalized. Neither was your honesty. His breathing changed. You're taking fragments of thought process and turning them into intention. There it was again. Not denial. Shrinkage. Make it smaller. Make it draft. Make it process. Make it context. He continued. You have no idea how much pressure I was under. I glanced at the page in front of me. Enough to classify me as financially interpretive during transition? Silence. Sometimes silence is confirmation with better tailoring. When he spoke again, the softness was gone. If you push this into a formal hearing, there's no putting it back. I leaned into the chair. You keep saying that like reversal is still the threat. I hung up. At Trey. Opt Kluser. Sophia texted. He came by the apartment. He wants to know what I gave you. He said Lily needs protection. I typed back. Lily does. From him? Then I deleted the thread and wrote down the time. At Patru. Patruzechi. Daniel sent authenticated timestamp logs. At Chinch. Chinchesprezeche. An internal source at the foundation quietly confirmed Ethan had floated continuity language to a director 2 weeks before the restaurant. 2 weeks. He had planned his wife as a variable. At Chasse. 0. Another call came. Unknown number. I answered. A male voice I recognized immediately. One of the board directors. Arthur Hale. He sounded older than usual. Mrs. Bennett, he said. Formal enough to signal discomfort. There's concern the video from the restaurant may become a larger issue. May become? I almost admired the phrasing. It already is. I said. He hesitated. Was Mr. Bennett attempting to use your trust in connection with a non-disclosed dependent? Yes. Silence. Then, a formal hearing has been set for tomorrow morning. Not next week. Not after legal review. Tomorrow. That speed told me 2 things. First, the board believed the exposure was real. Second, someone inside the room was afraid Ethan might still have enough internal loyalty to contaminate evidence if given another day. Fear, in institutions, is often just truth arriving in an expensive suit. That night I slept in Margaret's guest room under crisp white linens that smelled faintly of lavender and old discipline. I did not dream. At Doi. Unsprezeche a.m. My phone vibrated once. An email from Ethan. No subject line. Just one sentence. If this goes public, Sophia and Lily will be destroyed too. Not remorse. Collateral management. Even in fear. He was triangulating women. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I forwarded the email to Margaret and Daniel. And for the first time since Le Bernardin, I smiled. Because that was the thing about men like Ethan. They are most dangerous when they feel powerful. But they become most useful the moment they panic. By 8:30 the next morning, the foundation building was already quieter than usual. Too quiet. The kind of silence organizations produce when they've sensed blood and are trying to behave professionally through it. Margaret and I took the private elevator upstairs. The hallway outside the boardroom smelled faintly of coffee, vool, and money attempting to remain respectable. Ethan was speaking to one of the directors when the elevator opened. He stopped when he saw me. The director stepped away almost immediately. That told me more than any apology could have. Influence had already begun to curdle around him. Ethan approached. Not close enough to touch. Just close enough to lower his voice. We can still stop this. I looked at him. He was immaculate. Navy suit. White shirt. Cufflinks I'd bought him in Geneva. The visual vocabulary of a man who still thought surfaces counted as defense. How? I asked. His eyes flicked toward Margaret. Then back to me. We say the restaurant video was misleading. We say there was a private matter involving a child in need of discretion. We separate the personal from the institutional. There it was. He wasn't trying to save the truth. He was still trying to edit it. And the trust? I asked. He exhaled. Administrative confusion. And the memo? Preliminary language. And Lily? That one landed harder. His face changed. Not guilt. Annoyance at the loss of control. She doesn't need this. No, I said. She needed a better father. Margaret shifted beside me. A movement so small it barely existed. But Ethan noticed. He always noticed witnesses. His voice went lower. If this hearing proceeds the way Daniel wants, everyone in that room will protect themselves first. You know that? Yes, I said. That's why I'm here. He stared at me. Searching for the old Claire, the diplomatic one. The one who solved discomfort before it became visible. That woman had built donor dinners. Seated people by influence. Remembered allergies. Wrote thank you notes. And made his ascent feel inevitable. He had mistaken that labor for softness. You think these people care about you? He asked quietly. I held his gaze. I think they care about precedent. That was when the boardroom doors opened. A court reporter stepped in carrying a slim machine case. I saw Ethan register her and go still. Conversation could still be managed. Record was different. We entered. The room was long, cool, and almost offensively tasteful. Walnut table, matte glass water carafe, legal pads aligned like discipline. 3 directors seated already. 2 more standing near the windows. Outside, the city glittered with total indifference. Daniel was there. So was outside counsel. There is a particular kind of room wealthy people fear. Not prison. Not scandal page. Not public rage. A room where calm people begin asking specific questions in the correct order. I took my seat beside Margaret. Ethan sat across from me. Not beside. Across. Appropriate. The board chair. Helena Moore folded her hands. Let's begin. Counsel started with the timeline. Devoutine. Restaurant incident. Existence of undisclosed dependent. Evidence of concealed household expenditures. Possible adjacency to protected capital. Internal succession language. Exposure risk to the foundation. No raised voices. No theatrics. Just sequence. It was perfect. Ethan answered the first few questions the way men like him always do, precisely enough to sound cooperative. Vaguely enough to preserve escape. Then counsel asked about Sophia. Then Lily. Then the expense vehicles. Then the phrase, donor-facing continuity. Then the memo. I watched the room change incrementally. Not explode. Reclassify. He was no longer a respected executive under scrutiny. He was becoming a pattern. And once powerful people become a pattern, the room stops wondering whether to save them. It starts calculating the cost of touching them. Counsel slid 1 page forward. Mr. Mann, Bennett. Did you authorize or participate in planning assumptions connected to Mrs. Bennett's trust or trust-adjacent assets without full beneficiary disclosure? Ethan sat very still. That depends on how you define planning assumptions. A bad answer. Even he knew it. Counsel didn't react. How do you define them? He glanced at the board chair. Then at Daniel. Then at me. He was looking for softness. There was none. Outside. Someone shut a distant door. Inside? I could hear the court reporter's fingers moving with mechanical patience. Ethan straightened. I reject the implication that I acted in bad faith. Helena Moore answered before counsel could. This room is no longer discussing implication. That was the first moment he looked genuinely afraid. He should have. Because next came the question that would break the center. This story contains fictionalized elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Counsel began laying out the documents one by one. Not dramatically. Methodically. The restaurant video still. Sophia's copied financial notes. Timestamp logs from Daniel's office. The succession memo. The email Ethan sent at 2:11 a.m. invoking public fallout for Sophia and Lily. The references to donor-facing continuity. The phrase personally affected parties. The logline reducing my financial credibility during transition. Each point landed with less noise than the last. That was what made it lethal. Drama leaves room for interpretation. Pattern does not. Ethan tried one final pivot. This is being presented in the most hostile possible framing. Counsel nodded once. Then let's simplify. She slid the trust instrument toward him. Daniel opened it to the relevant clause, but did not speak. Counsel looked up. Mr. Bennett. Before testing access assumptions against this structure. Did you read it? The room went still. Ethan blinked. Then he looked at the page. Then at Daniel. Then at me. No answer. Counsel repeated herself. Did you read the governing instrument before acting on assumptions connected to it? I knew. Before the moment finished arriving. That this was where the center would break, because no answer could save him. If he had read it, then the concealment was deliberate. If he had not, then he had moved money, language, and strategy around a protected structure he was too arrogant to understand. Counsel asked a third time, Mr. Face. Bennett. The court reporter's fingers paused over the keys. Ethan inhaled. For the first time since Le Bernardin. He seemed smaller, not because anyone had shouted, because he no longer controlled the order of truth. Finally, he said, I reviewed portions relevant to household planning. Daniel spoke then. Calm as winter. So no. A flicker of anger crossed Ethan's face. I'm not going to be trapped by semantics. Helena Moore leaned forward slightly. This is not semantics. This is competence. There are sentences that do not sound emotional and still take power away permanently. That was one of them. Counsel moved to the memo. Did you author or approve language describing Mrs. Bennett as a personally affected party whose financially interpretive influence should be reduced during transition? Ethan's mouth tightened. That language was exploratory. Exploratory toward what? Counsel asked. Silence. Not because he had no words. Because he had too many. And all of them were incriminating. Counsel turned one page. Did you intend to preserve donor confidence by reducing Mrs. Bennett's visibility while concealing the existence of a second household? He looked at me then. Big mistake. Because he was not looking at a wife anymore. He was looking at the witness his strategy had manufactured. No, he said. Sophia's signed statement was slid forward. Then the timeline. Then the email. Then the routing references. Then Daniel's log noting the attempt to test assumptions against the trust. Pattern. 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 The room didn't explode. It recalibrated. Helena folded her hands. Mr. Frode. Bennett. This board can survive embarrassment. What it cannot survive is concealed exposure attached to governance. He tried once more. I built this foundation's donor network. Arthur Hale answered flatly from 2 seats down. And very nearly built it into a liability. That was the moment the room stopped deciding whether he was unlucky, and started deciding what to do with him. Interim restrictions were proposed first. Access suspension. Communications review. Immediate removal from trust-adjacent decision pathways. External counsel expansion. Internal governance notice. Then Helena said the word Ethan had been fearing since Daniel mentioned it. Badge. He went still. Your building access is suspended pending final review. She continued. Your foundation phone and credentials will be surrendered before you leave this floor. A long silence followed. Then Ethan turned to me. Not the board. Me. Of course. Men like him always look to women last. As if after losing the institution they can still recover the room emotionally. Claire, he said quietly. You know this is excessive. I looked at him. Then at the stack of documents. Then back at him. No. I said. This is reading. No one spoke after that. They didn't need to. The classification had already happened. He was no longer the polished executive who had made one complicated personal mistake. He was a risk item with tailoring. And once that happens in a room like that, the rest is administrative. It ended the way expensive disasters usually do. Quietly, a young compliance officer arrived with a small envelope and a practiced expression. Ethan placed his badge into it without looking at her. Then his phone. Then the spare access card from his wallet. No one rushed him. Humiliation rarely needs volume when the room has already agreed on meaning. The directors began gathering papers with the efficient detachment of people relieved the infection had finally become visible. One by one. They avoided touching him with their eyes. That was the part he felt most. Not accusation. Absence. Margaret stood beside me while counsel outlined next steps. Helena asked Daniel to coordinate with external review. Arthur Hale requested a donor risk memo by end of day. The court reporter packed her machine. The room was already converting him into process. Ethan remained seated for a second too long. As if refusing movement might delay classification, then he stood. I expected him to leave without speaking. He didn't. Of course he didn't. He crossed the room until he stood a few feet from me. Close enough for intimacy. Far enough for witnesses. His voice was low. You wanted to destroy me. Interesting. Even now. He needed a cleaner story. I met his gaze. No. I said. You confused exposure with destruction. A muscle moved in his jaw. You could have handled this privately. There was nothing private about what you built. He looked past me then. Toward the window. The board chair. The empty water glass at his place. Anywhere but the truth. What happens to Lily? He asked. That almost made me pity him. Almost. Because the question was finally correct. Just unbearably late. What happens to Lily? I said. Depends on whether one adult in her life decides to tell the truth without using her as cover. He swallowed. For the first time in 11 years. He had no room left where language would save him. He left without another word. I watched him walk down the hallway toward the elevator with an envelope in one hand and nothing in the other. No phone. No badge. No audience left to manage. Just a man in a navy suit discovering that consequence has excellent posture. By evening, the board had issued interim notices. Legal review expanded. Financial structures isolated. Donor communications delayed pending counsel. Sophia and Lily were moved into separate representation through Margaret's recommendation. Not Ethan's. That mattered to me, because revenge without precision is just another mess. And I had not done all this work to become messy. 3 days later, the final call came from Helena Moore. Her tone was formal, but not cold. Mrs. Bennett. The board has voted. Mr. Bennett's role has been terminated effective immediately. External review remains ongoing. Your trust protections remain intact. Further, several recommendations in the succession materials have been referred for independent governance examination. I thanked her. Then I ended the call and stood for a long time in the library of Margaret's townhouse. Looking out at the late afternoon light, washing over the Upper East Side like money trying to look soft. Margaret entered quietly. It's done, she said. I nodded. No, I said after a moment. It's documented. That made her smile. A week later, I returned to the penthouse while Ethan was at his lawyer's office. I did not take much. The Cartier watch my father had given me. My own papers. A cashmere throw from the bedroom armchair. A framed photograph of my mother. 2 notebooks. A pair of old Adidas sneakers shoved in the back of the closet from a charity walk years ago. Strange, what belongs to you, once a life has been stripped of performance. On the kitchen island sat a bowl of untouched fruit and a stack of mail arranged in perfect alignment. For one brief moment, the apartment looked exactly as it always had. Beautiful. Ordered. False. I left my keys beside the bowl. Not dramatic. Placed. Precision for precision. Then I noticed something at the far end of the counter. A yellow legal pad in Ethan's handwriting. 3 words at the top of the page. Sequence. Donor. Response. I stared at it for a second. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because even in collapse, he had still been trying to arrange the story. I tore the page off, folded it once, and slipped it into my coat pocket. Not as revenge. As a reminder, later that night, alone in the apartment Margaret had helped me secure on the Upper East Side. I poured a glass of wine and stood barefoot by the window in silence. No violin music, no tears on cue, no dramatic ending. Just the clean, unfamiliar weight of a life in which I no longer had to protect a man from the evidence of himself. My phone buzzed once. An unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then another message came through. Not voicemail this time. Just text. From Ethan. I never thought you'd take it this far. I read it once. Then I typed back the truest sentence I had left. You never thought I was reading. I blocked the number. Outside. The city moved with its usual expensive indifference. Inside. For the first time in a long time, everything was exactly where it belonged. Not because I had won loudly. Because I had won correctly. And in our world, that was always the more permanent kind.
This content is entirely fictional. Any similarity to real persons or events is coincidental. This video is not news, not a documentary. It is presented for creative storytelling purpose only. AI-assisted production.